Helmut Marko has opened up about the future of Ricciardo in the team, and while it seemed like it's secured, right now the situation speaks otherwise. Even though Helmut Marko stated that in 2024 everything will remain the same and the drivers won't change their seats, the latest statement regarding Ricciardo and Lawson could have hinted towards a swap between these two drivers, as the 8-time race winner is now slowly but surely nearing the end of his journey if he doesn't get promoted in 2025 in Red Bull. With all this in mind, is Lawson the next new driver for the next year, and can he prove himself against Tsunoda once again? It's safe to say that one of the greatest dramas that could happen right now is between Red Bull and their own drivers. And while the statements have changed left and right, the latest one from Marko has hinted towards a clear direction that Racing Bulls tend to follow in the upcoming period: make the team as youthful as possible. For example, 2024 is very unlikely to give us a driver's change now that Perez and Ricciardo got to keep their seats, but in 2025, when Marko stated that the cards will be reshuffled, it's likely that Lawson will take Ricciardo's seat, and the only chance for the Aussie to remain in this sport would be to replace Perez. In this regard, Marko went on to say, Daniel was put in the car, and if he would have been significantly faster than Yuki, there was an idea to bring him back to Red Bull Racing, but he also had this up and down. So far he didn't fulfill the criteria to be a Red Bull Racing driver. Obviously, this was the primary goal as to why Ricciardo accepted a role in Racing Bulls in the first place, and while it's safe to assume that he would likely perform better in the RB20 than Perez, who scored only 28 points in the last 8 races, the team doesn't want to pull the trigger for unknown factors. There have been talks that the sponsors behind Perez, such as Carlos Slim, who owns Telcel and Telmax, as well as Liberty Media, have applied huge pressure on the team to keep Perez due to the upcoming race later this year in Mexico, and the fear that if Perez doesn't drive there, it would be a massive drop in popularity, as well as revenue from Latin American fans. But while Marko went on to deny these rumors, saying that it was a decision based on the team and the team only, what we're seeing right now with Lawson is definitely pushing towards a different narrative that has engulfed the Austrian and the Italian squad due to their shared history of drivers, as Marko said. We rate Lawson high and he will get his chance. Just wait. In September, you will have an answer. This is a definitely picked choice of words from Marko because while his statements have been changing in the previous couple of months, this one is a clear indicator that Racing Bulls want to continue their voyage with Lawson and not with Ricciardo. Although it's worth mentioning that Ricciardo's input in Racing Bulls' technical development has been massive. The fact that he's underperforming and just started to catch up with Tsunoda in the last 7 races is something that kept the Faenza-based squad on their toes, as they want to explore more options and sign with drivers who will be more motivated to drive for them, unlike Daniel. Even though his statements are loud indicators that he's focused on a project that saw some big names join it, such as Lauren Mekies and Peter Bayer, Ricciardo's ultimate goal is to join Red Bull Racing, which could be seen as a distraction from the goal that the team has ahead of themselves to become as independent as possible and therefore push towards greater results with a young duo of drivers. There isn't a better choice for this than Lawson, especially because of the fact that he's a driver from Red Bull's academy, and what's even more important is that he has a clause in his contract that would have allowed him to move to another team if Red Bull doesn't provide him with a seat for 2025. What Marko also said in his latest interview is that while many of the teams on the grid would love to take Lawson on a loan, with Audi being one of the strongest contenders to do so, this is quite unacceptable and impossible for them to do, especially because they have huge plans for him. But this is something that we've been hearing for quite some time from Horner, and not putting enough trust in Lawson as well as promising him something and then failing to deliver is not going to help the team on a long-term basis, because losing a driver of Lawson's caliber is not something you want to endure when you want to have the two young drivers battling it out on the grid. However, Ricciardo is now more than satisfied with how everything is going down in Racing Bulls, saying that the team is a lot more involved with him and his feedback, which isn't genuinely matching the vibe nor the statements that are coming from Marko. Elaborating on the future of Racing Bulls and what the focus is for the Faenza-based squad, Ricciardo went on to say, It does feel different in terms of how I am involved in the team's decisions, and we got a new look in with this and that, but your actions have to follow. You bring in new ideas, the new management spend time in other teams and organizations, and yeah, it's just a new way of looking at things. I think that in itself and their intentions and the way they go about it has made people kind of stand up and say, alright, this isn't a junior team anymore. We're making kind of big boy decisions, and we're taking risks, and we're setting targets, and high targets, the ones that we realistically think we can attain. Be that as it may, it seems like two of the most endangered drivers on the grid right now are Ricciardo and Perez, and for the paradox to be made bigger, it looks like they're fighting for the same spot on the grid, to be Max's teammate. The RB20's dominance is gone, and Red Bull desperately needs a strong second driver who will be close to Max's performance, because by losing the Constructors' Championship, they will also lose a chunk of money, but will receive more time in the wind tunnel, which they can optimize in order to fix their car for the next season. Now, while Lawson is set to take Ricciardo's spot, it's not necessarily bad news for the 8-time race winner because of the fact that he is a Red Bull driver, and this is a team that, believe it or not, tends to take care of their drivers when they have a huge interest in them, which is a situation like the one we're living in right now. Both of the drivers will be tested out properly, and while talks about Lawson replacing Perez if his test went extremely well were quite fundamentally accepted throughout the grid, that doesn't really seem to be the case right now. Lawson is set for a test in Imola along with Ricciardo later in September, and this was supposed to be the test that would decide who will get to replace the struggling Perez in Red Bull in the remainder of 2024, but the narrative has changed there, and the 2024 season remains exactly the same for the last 10 races of the season. Marko has provided an excellent opportunity for Lawson, but was also forced to back up Perez and take a defensive stance for the veteran driver after saying that he completely collapsed during the Spa GP, a race that he started as second but finished 8th on the grid behind his teammate Verstappen, who finished 5th after starting 11th. Elaborating on Perez's future in Red Bull, Marko said, "We believe that we can turn it around and make the car more stable for him. To be teammates with Max is not the nicest thing in Formula 1. Checo has his merits. He has won races, and our discussion was not just about drivers, it was about what we can do to improve the situation. We have to try to make the car easier to drive. The more difficult the car is to drive, the more the difference to Max comes out because he's such an outstanding talent." There was an easy solution to this problem. Put a driver who will respect and earn the seat, unlike Perez, who has been underperforming severely in the past 8 races or ever since the car started to struggle to catch up with the MCL 38 and the W15. But Red Bull have opted to trust the process and to continue with Sergio. This was probably a very bad experience for Ricciardo, who was seen smiling in Spa with Lauren Mekies and Christian Horner, as well as popping champagne with Verstappen on their shared helicopter drive home, but it seems like the Austrian team didn't stand true to their promise, which will now affect the entire drivers' market from 2025 onwards. With all this in mind, do you think that Ricciardo deserved more from Red Bull and their commitment? And more importantly, do you think that the decision of him being replaced by Lawson is a good one made by Racing Bulls? Let us know in the comments below.